In this episode, I want to answer why Jordan Peterson is not correct and is correct when he says that postmodernism and Marxism have the same root. I will also explain why postmodernism never had its definition, even in the philosophers of postmodernism, that postmodernism is the position, the feeling that one takes to the world. It's opposed to any kind of ideology, and the only place where it really was incorporated is fiction. Luckily, science fiction was a really good place to start to create new aesthetics, and that's why I studied it. I found out that at least two Gorbachev's advisors, Eduard Arabogli and Georgy Shakhnazarov, who were really important politicians during Perestroika, invested a lot of their time into science fiction as a way to communicate this new stance toward the reality. I think they were among those who introduced postmodernism in Soviet thinking, into Soviet culture, which probably led to its collapse. Since 2000s, the ideology of perestroika, of Soviet pluralism, are seen as a mistake, as a step back from the totalitarian thinking. So maybe if today's totalitarian governments return to old approaches, the way to combat them is an old approach of postmodernism. So let the battle begin. Although there is a pejorative view of internet discussions among all adequate people, there is actually one benefit of the internet. It's the possibility to get out of your circle and find new people. This is exactly like traveling, although instead of traveling physically somewhere, you have to travel mentally to find these people and to be able to communicate with them. Whether you'll find them, it all depends on you, on your motivation, your interests, your skills to research. It's almost a proven fact that people who don't know how to research actually end up in a closed world. It's the world in which you're stuck with a certain type of two-dimensional morality. And these two dimensions are what is good and what is bad. In philosophy, two-dimensionality of thinking is called monism, from the word mono, one. This one is something that you decided is the most important thing for the reality. You reduce the reality to this one aspect. And you suddenly think that all the reality is determined by this one thing. Like money, education, parents. And because of that, all your will and your force is focused on the thing that you consider to be the most important. Obviously, if you think something is important, you try to change these things, but it's wrong. It's a mistake in your thinking. You didn't research well. You used a universal idea and basically applied it to your life, and most likely you made a mistake. I want to, of course, say that you is not you in particular, my listener, but I mean you in abstraction, someone who is a monistic subject. A monistic you is really well represented on the internet in debates. This is someone who comes with the only correct answer in a debate. This monistic you is associated with typical male conversation, especially between men and women, men and kids. The language betrays the monist because he or she is the smartest, the strongest, the most powerful, knows everything how it should be, an expert. The monist doesn't question his or her position. Monistic you is what happens when you don't know how to question what you know. So you have a self-confident, but at the same time stupid you. This is the problem of research. You're stuck with what you learned and now you believe in it, so you think that you can push your dream to come true. It's false. Besides that, it's usually violent. To yourself as well as to other people. That's a commonly discussed mistake in modernist, monistic thinking, like communism or conservatism, which basically leads to believing that if you do something hard enough, it's gonna happen, it's gonna be the reality. To put it up front, it's just a militant stance on the society and other people. It's a way to take their freedom. And this is a way people discipline themselves to give up the freedom. There is a particular psychological connection between believing and act without reflecting and without understanding what is done. For a monist, there is nothing else but emotions. Everything is decided. Now everybody should be converted into a monist, of a particular kind, of course. Instead of seeing differences and learning something from them, a monist is usually blind, so all of his or her energy is focused onto something that is known, and the energy that I'm talking about is sexual. So all the sexual energy, the libidinal energy, in contact with new and unknown is wasted on blindness and denial. It just happens to be that you don't get aroused by the things that you don't consider to be important. If you meet the unknown things for the first time with an unbiased view, probably you will discover new sexual tension. And art is a tool to emancipate some of this energy and to use it to explore oneself. At least to understand how this energy is formed, since we are relying on habits too much. Habits are what we do without realizing the process of doing it, something that emotionally returns us into the state of comfort. We repeat the same things every day, and some of them are automatic, so we don't notice doing them. The monistic you is especially blind to what it feels while thinking or acting. Of course, there are some limitations to what one can feel and what one can do, but these limitations are often in the head, in the psychology of the person. The reality, in its scientific and cultural sense, are not limited by anything in particular. They are unpredictable and unknown to the moment. Of course, there are limitations in everyone's reality, but these limitations remain unstudied and unknown to the person. So that's where the freedom kicks in. That's where the freedom is not reducible to knowledge that exists. Freedom is not given. Freedom is not learned. Freedom must be searched for, even researched for. There was one moment in history where philosophers declared that they had an epiphany where this freedom can come from. And we can look into German, French, and American philosophy of the 50s and the 80s. I'm talking about the shift from modernism to postmodernism, the idea of epistemological shift, moving from one belief and knowledge to something else, to another type of knowledge, the rebirth of religions called New Wave, spiritualism in music, and psychedelic drugs. This is the context where new philosophy appeared. German philosophy of the Frankfurt School, French philosophy of post-structuralism, and American philosophy of postmodernism are actually connected to one thing. And this one thing made Jordan Peterson associate postmodernism with Marxism without seeing the big difference between them. The main similarity between Marxism and postmodernism is the reliance on the feeling of the right and wrong consciousness. Marxism is the project where one is emancipated by learning how to live properly to his or her class. Capitalist ideology usually hides the difference between classes and so makes one blind to the class stance in the society. Postmodernism is similar. Instead, it actually says the position that the interpreter takes. So there can be no research without the researcher, without the person who has to make conclusions. So there is no knowledge without the producer of knowledge, and every knowledge is tied to the person who produced it. The source becomes the most important thing in knowledge. The biggest and philosophical difference between Marxism and postmodernism is how they deal with essentialism and body. For Marxism, everything is determined by the class. Class is this essential category that you cannot overcome, and you always have to return to production and distribution. It's very different in postmodernism. Postmodernism denies any kind of essentialism. Race, nation, these are just arbitrary categories that exist in the language. So the French philosophers introduced the process of deconstruction, of putting oneself in the position through which one is deconstructing oneself. As Foucault once said, after I deconstruct the concept, it's no longer what it used to be, what it pretended to be. The purpose of deconstruction is to restore a naive and fresh view on the things that surround us every day. And the first thing that surrounds you is your habit. For the monist you, this habit is the whole world, and this means that this is the imperative for the others, how to live. And this natural you can be deconstructed as any power figure, as a researcher, as a teller, as a professional, as a president. The position of being oneself and being in power is constructed in the language. So if it's constructed in the language, it can be deconstructed through the analysis of the language. Being oneself is constructed in the language in the way we are arguing to be right, in those moments when we have power and knowledge, or think that we have. Moments when we feel faithful, moral, superior to other people. So the alternative way to go is to question everything you know, everything that you are ready to argue for, because it may be incorrect. And with this, suddenly you discover different motivations and intentions in your own thinking. This is where the Western philosophy kicked in the 50s to explain exactly the problem of how to relate to knowledge without being sure that it's true. The language that a person with such mindset can create is an open language, a language of contact. This is the language where every definition can be adopted to other values and understanding. That's formal acceptance of difference. Judging by the books that I read for my project, Eastern European science fiction, including Stanislav Lem, who was a little bit inventive, and some other experiments of the Strugatsky brothers, there is little expectation of any political innovation. These are not scientists transforming their ideas into fiction and trying to really teach something. They actually just want to use the power of fiction to promote these ideas. But even among the most conservative authors like Yefremov, aesthetics is always super progressive and contradicting any conservative philosophy. It's shocking, it's new, it's exotic, it's sensual. It's often transgressing social realist expectations. And since these were the novels from the 50s and 60s, most likely they were not postmodern because the term itself was not really established in literature and aesthetics. Science fiction is a really weird genre of literature because it has to combine something extraordinary and exotic and at the same time be realistic and plausible. And if we look at the most conservative writer, Yefremov, and the most progressive writer, Shakhnazarov, in terms of how they deal with ideology, they deal with the same ideologies, but their attitude to these ideologies change with the context and their aesthetic vision. Even in Yefremov's The Bull's Hour of 1968, you'll find a really, really shocking and progressive aesthetics that show that no abstract you can know anything in advance. Nonetheless, ideologically, he states there is a possibility, and that's actually the only possibility, to plan ahead knowing what's going to happen based on science. And ideology, since it can be checked, is much more conventional than the feeling that the text creates. So aesthetics is in opposition to ideology. It's where you can start the deconstruction. Aesthetics is how the text is performed, how the relationships between characters actually mean something to the reader. On the surface, ideology means a lot. It's the logic of their cooperation, but the reader decides whether to be the monistic you or the pluralistic you and see from a different perspective than it is proposed by the ideologically correct narrator. The feeling is uncontrollable, that's why the interpretation itself happens in the reader's head, and the reader is responsible for a particular feeling. This is what one will find in French, German, and American philosophers trying to theorize the difference between modernism and postmodernism. It's the shift from logic to sensorial. That's the idea of multimodality comes in, that there are possibilities to read the Western philosophers actually propose to see the change from modernism to postmodernism as so-called epistemological shift, the shift in how we perceive the reality. It's not completely what they actually mean. They mean that we need to perceive it through our sensory experience. We have to experience it through our feeling, and our feeling is usually really different to what we know. We can find this contradiction in Lyotard's The State of Postmodernism, 1979, in the analysis of this essay by Jürgen Habermas and the Frankfurt School in 1980, and then the Americans taking it into the realm of literature and culture by Anthony Giddens in 1981, in actually German Review, and Friedrich Jameson, who comments on German Marxist philosophy, sketching it in 1984 and then publishing as a book in 1991 in his famous book Postmodernism, or the Cultural Logic of Late Capitalism. Many, including Jordan Peterson, think that Friedrich Jameson is a Marxist, but if we look at this definition of cultural logic, it's absolutely in opposition to the logic of distribution and production in Marxism and any kind of essentialism that existed in other ideologies. It creates a new ideology, the ideology of aesthetics, and this is something that cannot be tamed and controlled. The feeling is not rational. The period of late 70s and 80s is the moment where new identities are created and new references are needed. So this is the moment to look for something that has not been yet spoken of. One example would be human rights. This is a new concept that is essentialized in the ideologies of freedom and democracy, but at the same time, human right is not a natural giving, and in different countries, these natural rights are different. In the existing ideologies, it's easier to find the moral code of the patriarchy. So, actually, the rights of a man, of a powerful commander, are essentialized as the most normal rights, while others' rights are actually reduced. The morality itself, the moral code of ideology, supports a particular type of production in which there is a hierarchy and the powerful man stands on the top of this hierarchy. So female movements are a question of is female right essential and universal for all the cultures? The answer in many societies is still no. In many totalitarian societies, the moral code of the patriarchy is the basis for the ideology. These are the fathers, the grandfathers of the ideology who are commanding how the reality should be. They are the monistic you that should be replicated in everyone's brain. It's not a big stretch to say that religious societies and secular societies are founded on the patriarchy, and that's the universal essentialized right that the ruler has in all of these anti-democratic societies. The patriarchy, the moral code to fight for the proper heterosexuality are usually a guise for a hierarchical society. The position of these philosophers, the patriarchy is really connected to avant-garde aesthetics, the idea that one person creates the whole world. They see it as a way to usurp power and to exercise it upon other people. Avant-garde and scientific fiction of the 20th century becomes just another version of the patriarchy. Avant-garde can be innovative in how it does things, but the way how it feels about the world, the way it experiences the world is the same. Let's think about Stalinism or fascism or Nazism. There was really a groundbreaking research on how avant-garde aesthetics are connected to all the totalitarian regimes. It was done by Boris Groys, and he introduced the concept of Gesamtkunstwerk, basically the state as a personal aesthetic and constructive and industrial approach to the reality. A totalitarian state indeed produces a particular aesthetics. 20th century totalitarian states were considered to be factories. They produced mass murders as well as mass culture, and of course as well as products on the shelves in stores. In the industrious, totalitarian and avant-garde aesthetic, the production and distribution indeed are the essential features of the society. So Marxism was absolutely in place in the Soviet Union. I mean by that, if there is monopoly on who produces, there is always a question of production and distribution in anyone's thinking. So it is essential. It is the basis of the society. Postmodern thinkers, especially from France, spoke of the libidinal energy that is invested in the essentialized processes. So distribution and production becomes the main place to import sexual energy. Sexuality became also like a factory. So social realism was about love at the factory, while Western modernism was more about sexuality being productive. Modernism interacted with the idea of sexuality and work on different levels, and that's the place where postmodern appeared as a criticism of it. I would go that far to say that actually postmodernism can be seen in a lot of modernist texts. So there is no such a thing as postmodernism besides in the position of someone who reads a postmodern text. And this position presupposes criticism to definitions, to essentialist categories, and a really attentive reading of a postmodernist text always returns the same answer, that nothing can be learned. All of the references found, all of the interpretations made, all of the symbols learned, they're just fiction. And because of that, there is something else that happens in the process of reading. It's the process of communication. Communicating can happen on different levels, including political, and that's how ideological, ethical, and other aspects basically interact deeply. In his essay in 1980, Jürgen Habermas criticized Lyotard's essay of the previous year, the postmodern situation, saying that Lyotard created a rather conservative project of preserving high modernism, the achievement of the spirit, but at the same time, Lyotard, and Habermas agreed with him, decided not to emphasize one's own high modernism, not to be the authority in what high modernism is. And that's the whole question of the language. You can never be the one who speaks the proper language. You are the one who learns the language of the other to be able to learn how to communicate. That's what postmodernism is. While reading a novel, one has to learn its language, not interpret it according to a particular agenda or already existing concepts in one's ideology.